3, 2, 1. Thank you for joining me and thank you for being here. I am Casey and apparently you are here to listen to me talk about what we watched last week. Well, mostly it's about more than just what we watched. It's about the stories we got into, whether that be books or movies or TV or short form or YouTube sometimes. At the end, this is a show about spreading love for the things we love, and I'm really about stories. So while there are criticisms in here, I hope they come off as legitimate criticisms and not nitpicks or whining. I would like to talk about things, whether I like them or dislike them, in an appropriate way, right? Other than that, there was a video we did on DC Comics and stuff earlier this month that I put a lot of work into that I don't love, but, you know, it's getting traction, so yay. And we do have something coming up later this week about a bunch of the DC animated movies, the DC AMU, if that is also your speed. Other than that, that's all the updates I really have as far as this week, so let's get into the second week of August of 2024. Monster Total Advancement from 1968. What do you think the actual destructive power of Manila smoke rings are? Like, could they crush a building? Are they like a tangible construct? I'm really curious what they can do. Also known as Destroy All Monsters, in the distant future of 1999, humanity has managed to round up every kaiju of note onto Monster Island, making it nice and convenient for a new alien race to proceed to mind control everyone and just wreck shop. Even with the promise of destruction of all the monsters, the bulk of the movie is about our human protagonist's mission to release the monsters from foreign influence just in time for the final little smackdown with Ghidorah and a giant flaming red herring. Everything involved with the kaiju and the miniature sets are especially well worked in this production. The little bit we get are some of the most memorable tokusatsu sequences of this original Little Golden Kaiju era, while the human story, which ends up being the bulk of the story, does feel a little more generic in substance for me. That's possibly because I'm rewatching these in such a short succession, and I am reminded of how similar some of these plots end up being. This just isn't my personal favorite adaptation of either the Control the Monsters or the alien invasion story in Godzilla's history. 2024's Doctor Who: The Celestial Toymaker. For the first time, Doctor Who ignores both science and historical fiction to give us an entirely fantastical adventure with a benevolent and bored god in the Toymaker who separates our TARDIS crew as well as turns the Doctor invisible, so, you know, William Hartnell could have a little break for a couple of weeks, forcing everyone to compete in a series of nonsensical games to get back to their favorite big blue box. With the Doctor being both invisible and mute for over half the serial, his loss is especially felt, but Steven and Dodo do get a lot to do and more real back and forth than the pair has gotten in their previous serials together. It is Peter Purvis, Jackie Lane, and Michael Gow, the titular Toymaker, that make this serial as fun as it is when the substance of the story is kind of as devoid as the sets are. For this watch, though, we've watched the 2024 animated reconstruction, and even with all the expansions and the creative liberties to make the Toymaker's realm more surreal, it's really evident how little money this story has in terms of budget. The story and games feel a little confused and rushed and slapped together, so much so that we are reusing wardrobe from Marco Polo even. At the same time, it's how far they took that budget that makes me really appreciate and enjoy this story for what it is, mixed with the animation, which I think complements this story perfectly for me. I will always rather have the original story as it was presented, but I really equally appreciate and respect the official animated release we got for the Celestial Toymaker. Friday the 13th, Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan from 1989. What do you think made the punk so special? To be the only people to, like, distract Jason to the point of making him stop, but only provoke him enough to scare everyone away instead of, like, anything else. We have up and made the biggest change to the Friday the 13th formula in Part 8. It's still about our big boy Jason walking through just about everyone in his way, but this time he's on a boat. And, you know, sometimes he's in New York, I guess. I do not think there is a person on the internet who has talked about this movie and not remarked about how bad it is for a lot of people, so we will spare you that and talk about what we do like about this movie. Primary standout being Kane Hodder's Jason being able to carry over that intimidation and menace into the world of New York where it would be really easy for the character to feel so small. And I know it wasn't the planned version of the kill, but the sauna rock murder has always kind of stood out in my mind. Even if I don't think the effect looked the best, it's one of the ones that I always think of when talking about Part 8. The production also does make its very best use of the limited time they had on the filming location. A lot of the sequences that take place in the actual city are fun and engaging with great reactions from the extras just minding their day in this version of New York. 1983's Conquest. You know, I did not realize famed Italian horror director Lucio Fulci made his own little low fantasy barbarian epic like this, but he did. And full warning, I did fall asleep about halfway through because we put it on in the middle of the early morning at like 2 a.m., but I really tried to get through the story about a guy with a magic bow and an almost vegetarian. As in, like, it's his moral code to not kill animals, but he will steal animals that have already been hunted, if that makes sense. What kind of pescatarian is that? Teaming up to fight a witch who spends most of her screen time fucking a snake. I remember a lot of intense gore and naked people. Fog and a great soundtrack to fall asleep to. Can't wait to give this movie the proper attention it deserves. 1989's Nightmare on Elm Street, The Dream Child. I kinda wish this had been part 4 over Dream Master, following like Kristen, Joey, and Kincaid over Alice & Co. version 2, honestly. I think maybe that would have slid into the timeline better. I know we can't change that, but just like, coulda, shoulda, woulda. Following our protagonist, learn that her pregnancy is the catalyst for bringing Freddy Krueger back for the 5th time, as he both grooms the unborn child's psyche and does his round of putting down the rest of the cast and, thematic dreams as he does. I have kind of always had a soft spot for this Nightmare movie, as it was the first one I got to sit through and watch in its entirety. I still love the concept and the ideas around Freddy using the baby, and the dreams have always felt like appropriately thematic and well thought out. Despite what I love about this movie, I do also think it fumbles a lot in the execution, in part because of the cuts demanded by the MPAA. Even a few more moments of gore or effects wouldn't have made this feel any less like a paint-by-numbers Nightmare on Elm Street movie to me at this point for some reason. 2008's The Incredible Hulk from the MCU. So what does everybody think about the largely inconsequential deleted opening where our lead tries to off himself and we get a frozen Captain America cameo? Like, does anybody actually care about that? Or is it just me? I continue to wonder how Marvel convinced the US military to contribute so much to this production and make them look so completely incompetent and immoral throughout the production without being called out for it somehow. As we follow a scientist the military is hunting because he took some radiation steroids, and now when he gets angry he beats up armies single-handedly. It's about our lead's search for a cure to this curse, through which the plot really leans into the characters and their dynamics, as we are both constantly moving towards the movie's end goal and running away from pursuers. Makes for a lot of good constant action and movement. While I have never particularly loved either lead's performances, I would hardly call either of them poor, maybe just a little breathless to me. The action sequences continue to be really well choreographed and intense, with real weight brought to the fight sequences between two tall CGI chads. I would also argue the soundtrack does let the movie down at a few moments, but I also think that is a generalized MCU problem and not specific to The Incredible Hulk, and I don't want to focus on that either. I think there's a whole lot this movie does really well. Doctor Who, The Gunfighters from 1966. One of the last purely historical series for Doctor Who. Will it change up the formula at all? No. We land and get separated and spend the next few episodes trying to get back together while meeting the most famous people around. This time country western flavored, when the Doctor and co spend time with both parties involved at the gunfight at the Old Cake Corral. The Doctor specifically getting confused for Doc Holliday by a few parties, while Steven and Dodo bounce back and forth between being just excited to be in the West and being in danger. According to brief glances on the internet, this is one of the lesser First Doctor serials in the eyes of the general public. Between the constant singing narration and the offbeat performances from the period actors, I can kind of understand why, but at the same time, the performances do seem to be on par with those in past stories set in periods like the Aztecs. And not gonna lie, I also like the song for the 2 episode periods I watched the show in. This is also a serial that ended up being a pretty decent showcase for the Doctor, as well as both Steven and Dodo getting fun moments to shine in their interactions with Doc Holliday and Wyatt Earp. I definitely understand why this isn't a story that is particularly well loved, but I still really found lots to enjoy here. 1978's Piranha. So here's a question. Who would you rather have in charge of your event in a crisis? The mayor from Jaws or the resort owner from Piranha? After we accidentally let loose some experimental super piranha into a river, it's up to the town drunk and an insurance investigator to both convince the town and escape the military trying to cover up the experimental super piranha. Even going into this knowing it was a Joe Dante production, because it's so, entrenched in Roger Corman, I am genuinely surprised with how earnest and genuine the movie ultimately ended up being. I think audiences today might expect this movie to be far more exploitative than what it ultimately delivered in the final product, as both Dante and his actors worked the limited script to the absolute best of its abilities. 1993's The Last Command by Timothy Zahn, narrated by Mark Thompson. We have introduced all the new characters and builds up the real threat they pose by giving them a fleet of battleships and a clone army. Time to tie it all together by delivering on several large-scale conflicts and the customary lightsaber duel in a throne room. As the story here is laid out, we get a really intense espionage plot throughout that real first act. Then when everyone splits off at the start of Act 2, those big conflicts start happening both in the foreground and the background of the story, as the first team leads a little off-the-book strike force to an Imperial cloning facility and a crazy Jedi Master, while the alternative plot is about a more direct confrontation with the trilogy's big bad and Thrawn, who, as always, gets his own through line with Captain Pelion. Oh yeah, plus Talon Card's story gets wrapped up really nicely with the Smugglers' Alliance, so we really are juggling 4 distinct plots through this book, and I think every book in this trilogy, honestly. For me, The Last Command manages to cap off the trilogy in a way that both feels in line with the Star Wars rhythm and poetry and tone, while finding both big and little ways to subvert expectations. We have all the grand scale and action you'd expect in a Star Wars finale, but at the same time, the series' real antagonist and Thrawn's downfall is more nuanced and removed from the action, which I think is a big thing I see an adaptation trying to change in a way that I personally think would change the story for the worse, but that's also just a me thing. Mark Thompson's narration for the audiobook adaptation is also amazing as always, and on the free Libby app. The combination of Zahn's dialogue and writing mixed with Thompson's storytelling abilities has made this one of the most enjoyable and engaging audiobook experiences I have experienced in my time both reading and listening to the written word in story format. Thompson really manages to bring characters to life with subtlety that is enhanced by the story narration by Zahn. I think coming out best in characters like Captain Pelion, intelligent and sympathetic characters with all these underlining tones of prejudice and speciesisms inherent with fascism in tones and things like the Empire. All of this talk about the book, and I didn't even mention the main characters and the huge arc Zahn manages to put them through on this trilogy while not managing to undo everything that came before. Luke has this whole journey of understanding what it means to be a Jedi and where do the responsibilities begin and end, both morally and ethically. Leia is both carrying twins throughout the trilogy and holds the entire Republic together at multiple points, and Han just gets to have a constant existential crisis about being a dad, pretty much. All wrapped around this intense little narrative about an evil Sherlock Holmes smurf and his perpetual micromanaging. 2024's Trap. So is this the first M. Night Shyamalan movie that didn't, hinge on a huge twist? Or was the twist the movie set up 3 different satisfying conclusions and just ignored them all? Where we watch a serial killer of a mouse realize he's caught in a mousetrap and his workings to squeeze out from it, all from that killer's perspective, with him doing all of the charming serial killer things with his daughter at a concert. Honestly, I would argue that this is one of M. Night's best directed productions. From the camera work to the performances, everything felt right for the tone we were going for. Even if some decisions felt a little off or offbeat, it felt deliberately so in a way that really vibed with me. Apparently, many people were really disappointed, or that was the general vibe I heard. But outside of the ending jerking you around a bit, I left wholly satisfied from a pretty full theater, so that's really good news for Trap. Yeah, that is everything we consumed metaphorically last week. Thank you for sticking with me throughout the whole video, though. I hope everyone got to watch something that's special or fun last week in their own right, and I'd love to hear what what that was for you. What did you watch last week? One more time, what we are releasing that isn't our weekly scheduled nonsense is a video on Friday about DC's animated movie universe. Other than that, thank you for being great and being you, and keep going out there and being good and doing good things and all of the awesome things, because you're awesome people. Thank you for being you.